schedule and to actively manage it, and to be as intrusive and rigorous in its review as possible.
Okay, so let's spend a little time on that, because words are very, very important right now,
yes.
Particularly with this issue right here.
Yes.
We have agreed, haven't we, that the company does not manage this project. They oversee it. It may report to this commission the status of it, but it does not manage this project, does it?
It does not.
So the question is, does staff and CM believe it to be reasonable and prudent to manage this complex build? The company does not manage this complex build, does it?
In that literal sense, I would agree with you, yes.
So the one who does manage this project, who are the contractors, they have an IPS, don't they?
Yes, presumably.
So it is factually incorrect to say this project is not being managed without an IPS. Would you agree?
I think we're using manage in a larger context. All the parties involved, the company, consortium, all have responsibilities, and they all need an IPS in order to conduct their responsibilities. And that's overall project management, if you will.
Well, I understand that's what you are attempting to say, but words are very important, and the prudence word is critically important here. So I'm asking you with regard to your question that it is imprudent to manage this project without an IPS. On the one hand, we have agreed that this contract, the managers of this schedule have an IPS, and we have agreed that the company does not manage this project. If you had chosen a different word than manage, we might be having a different discussion. Would you agree?
I think it speaks for itself, Counselor. I think we've defined what our expectation is with regard to all parties being aligned with the schedule, understanding the schedule, that it be realistic, understood, and I think the Q&A falls in with that. That's the meaning in which we are applying the standard.
I believe Mr. Day in the certification hearing said the company would actively manage the project.
Well,
so in that sense, the same sense that he was using that term, that's what he would use.
well, on page 27 of your testimony where you cite Mr. Day, you say, he says, we'll be watching the schedules, getting advanced schedules for us to look at to see if they're appropriate, and we're going to hold the consortium responsible for those schedules. Is that what he said?
That's what he said.
Yeah, well, Dr. Jacobs was just saying that that's what Mr. Day had used manage in his testimony, and what you've cited here doesn't really use the word manage.
It doesn't, but again, I think we're arguing about semantics.
Well, but semantics are important.
I think we've stated what this Q&A represents, and we're not saying that we've made any analysis or that there's any outcome. I would also add that we don't ultimately make prudency decisions as the commissioners. But we have an obligation to point out when we see something that we feel rises to the level of necessity. I mean, we've been discussing this with the company for a very long time about getting an IPS that's realistic and understood by all parties. This is not something new. This is not something that we haven't been talking about with companies, executives on down. I mean, this has been a long-standing issue, and we felt 6 years into the project, we've got to get something tangible, and somebody has to be held to account for that.
Okay.
So I think we've answered the question.
Well, we're going to spend some more time on it, but let me ask you this. What is the prudence standard that you used when making your assessment of imprudence here?
Generally, it's a reasonable man standard that's been used for this commission. It's essentially that are the actions or decisions that are under review those that a reasonable man with the appropriate experience and education would take.
Dr. Jacobs, are we a little premature in even discussing that at this time? Prudency?
Again, as Mr. Rutgers said, we have not identified any costs flowing from prudent or imprudent actions. We have not recommended any disallowance. We're just putting this on the table.
Your responsibilities are what?
My overall responsibilities are to actively monitor essentially all aspects of the project and to keep the commission, staff and the commission informed of what's happening out there and to identify any areas of concern.
And basically, if you were to go back, it's really to see from the genesis of this project that you report to this commission that the request by the owners of these projects to this commission to make sure that it comes in at the cost that this commission granted for the project and the time frame. Is that close to
That's part
your
of
responsibility?
Yes, sir.
So when we talk in terms of things that yes may come down the road, but yet still this commission, I would think, is still sitting and looking at, even though there has been discussion and we understand assumptions that are being made, but we're still looking at a project to come in at a cost, a price that this commission authorized from the get-go.
That's correct.
So Dr. Jacobs, I'm going to refer to that as the reasonable person or reasonable manager standard that we've referred to in the past.
Yes.
And so you're looking at what a reasonable manager or a reasonable person would do under the circumstances in the situation we're in right now. Is that right?
That's correct.
And Mr. Rucker, you just said that you've been having this conversation with the company for months now, if not years, about getting a schedule from the contractor that's the IPS schedule, in light of the fact that we don't have one, right?
Well, I mean, I could articulate month by month for the last 24 months what we have gotten and what each schedule was missing.
I don't disagree that you haven't been asking the company for it.
You know, I mean, at some point, you know, we're putting a place marker down. Okay, and that's all we're doing, is we're saying, we believe this is not a reasonable manager would go so long without such an essential tool, constructing such a very complex, I mean, and we could run through the list, first of a kind, first iteration, dormant industry. I mean, you just run through the list of things and then, you know, commissioners, if the company had told you at certification, oh, by the way, you know, years 4 through 6, we're not going to have a schedule that we can rely on, would that have been an acceptable risk point? I mean, we would have been screaming and our hands would have been waving like crazy. They never said that would happen. We know what they said, and that's what Mr. Day said. And I would also point out that in that stipulation, I believe we are required to notify the company and the commission if we see if the construction monitor is to notify the company that if he believes something is occurring that runs contrary to prudent management, he has to tell you. And that's all we're doing.
And
that's in the stipulation.
And I have the ability to ask you questions as to why you're taking that position, and that's really all I'm doing. I don't doubt that that's the position you're taking.
Okay, but I feel like we've answered this question 3 times.
No, you haven't, because I don't ask. If you've answered it 3 times, it's not the same question. I haven't asked the same question twice. But let me ask you this.
It's the same type of question, you just rephrased it.
Well, here's the important one. Here's the important one.
Okay.
I assume that you know what a reasonable manager would do under the circumstances. How would you get the IPS from the contractor?
That's not my problem.
No, it is your problem,
No, it's
because
not.
you're saying what a
It is-
reasonable manager would do.
No, it is not. Ratepayers, this commission, never contracted with this EPC. You came to us with a signed, sealed document with a regulatory out. This is your contract. This is Georgia Power's contract. It is your responsibility. It says in the contract, the language is in our testimony, that they are required to provide you with an IPS, otherwise they are in breach of contract. Have you filed anything down in federal court
Yes.
that suggests that they're in breach of contract for not filing
There's a
an
lawsuit pending.
IPS?
There's a lawsuit pending.
Specifically for an IPS?
There's a lawsuit pending. Would you?
Does it address the
I mean,
IPS?
Mr. Roger, you're not asking the question.
So I am going to ask a question. So your position is that a reasonable manager would declare this contract in breach?
If
And
you've
that's how we
gone-
avoid the imprudence.
I would suggest if you have gone 2 years without a satisfactory IPS, and it's well defined what that is, and you've done nothing about it, or not nothing about it, but you've not been able to affect positive change, then yes, we have the right to question what's going on.
So what would you do as a reasonable manager different than what the company is doing?
I'm not going to answer that question because I'm not party to the contract.
Well,
I
here's
mean,
my...
why don't, you have
I'm not trying to argue with you.
every
Mr. Roger. I'm
opportunity
trying-
in rebuttal to explain to the commission what you will do.
Okay.
It's your contract. Why don't you tell them what you're going to do to get an IPS?
Well, here's my difficulty, and Dr. Jacobs, you understand this from past prudence proceedings. It is important when one makes an allegation that one is failing to meet a reasonable manager standard. It is important to define what that reasonable manager would have done. What should we have done differently than we have done in order to try to get the IPS agreement, the IPS schedule from the contract? That's my simple question.
Well, I don't know what you have done, so it's hard for me to answer what I would do differently than what you have done.
So then how is it that we can say that we've been acting imprudently?
Because you don't have a integrated project schedule that all parties have seen, agreed to, and are working for.
But doesn't prudence relate to conduct and activities as opposed to results?
Yes, generally, but results are important. I mean,
Results
you can
are-
have improvements with no impact, it's not a problem.
Right. The results can tell you to go look at the conduct that led to that result and then determine whether or not that conduct was improved. Is that right?
That's correct.
But have you looked at the conduct? I think you just said you hadn't looked at the conduct that the company had performed.
Well, all we know is we're in deep commercial negotiations. That doesn't give us a whole lot to go on.
All you really know are the results.
We haven't seen any results yet, other than you don't have
Well, the
enough.
result, what you know is the circumstance, which is there is no IPS that the company has.
That's correct.
And that alone is what you were saying suggests imprudence.
Well, would you like me to try another analogy?
I'd like you to try it.
No, come on. It's like...
I'm not trying to
it's
argue
like-
with you,
it's
Mr.
like-
Rucker,
it's
to
like
get
a
you fired
Delta
up. I'm really
pilot.
not.
It's like a Delta pilot getting into his cockpit
It's not at all
without
like a Delta
flight
pilot.
plan.
It's not at all like a Delta pilot.
It's not?
No, it's not.
Somebody object.
I mean, the simple fact that he doesn't have the necessary tools to do his job by itself can be deemed imprudent.
It's the PSC.
Don't you believe so?
It's not at all like a Delta pilot, Mr. Ricker. I mean, I'm really trying not to argue or get fired up. I'm really just trying to ask some questions about the prudence standard and what's going on here.
I understand, I think being argumentative here, so it's a question.
All right, so let me ratchet this down a bit and go back to some. You recall you attend periodically, if not always, you attend monthly project review meetings.
Always.
Always. You recall the one in October, don't you?
Yes.
All right. You remember there was an incredibly healthy debate, at least it was reported to me, about schedule adherence, access to the IPS schedule, and when all of that was going to be delivered. Do you recall that?
There was a vigorous debate about that.
All right. And do you recall observing in your written document to the company, quote, "Company executives provided clear direction by acknowledging that schedule focus of the meeting had improved, but more details are needed if dates are missed and action plans are necessary to recover the lost time should be provided."
I do, and those were focused on sort of near-term actions, near-term accomplishments versus the schedule.
So, let me just ask it this way. Do you understand that the company has been asking the consortium for their integrated resource, for their IPS schedule?
I guess I don't know what form that asking has taken. Again, we've asked the question numerous times, and we've heard that they're in deep commercial negotiations. So I don't know what the company's asking.
And if SCANA is similarly situated and the owners don't have an IPS there either, which is what I think you assume to be true, is that right?
Oh, no, I don't know
Okay.
about SCANA.
If they were similarly situated, would they be imprudent also?
I would say yes.
You know, if the South Carolina PSC that's monitoring their process has declared them to be imprudent, or their Office of Oversight?
We don't know how their regulatory process works, Counselor, so we can't answer that question. They may be required to stay out until their utility asks that the units be brought into rate base. So, who knows?